Thank you so much for coming today. Really appreciate it. And I think perhaps the number of people here shows the direction of travel and the fact that there's still so much lack of knowledge and lack of information about what we as the furnishing industry should be doing. I spent most of my career working in the contract furniture sector, and I find it absolutely fascinating also talking to people in the retail furniture and bedding divisions, because we can all learn from each other. So thank you so much for coming today. I nearly forgot one of my official duties is to tell you we're not expecting a fire drill today. So if the fire bell goes off, you should exit through the fire exits and congregate outside the Dutch church just opposite. And toilets, there's one in reception area. Gents are downstairs, and there's a ladies upstairs outside the Mike Clare room. The other thing to note is you probably will see from the program, we have a lot of time for networking, because today is not just about listening, it's about learning from one another, hopefully get some new contacts, learn from what other people are doing. So please do make use of that. If you want to be introduced to someone or wonder if someone's here and you can't see them, come and talk to me or another member of the committee. We'll gladly help out where we can. Please do go upstairs. I'm absolutely delighted that the leading trade associations are also here today. So thanks to Jeremy from Commercial Interiors UK, Carpet Recycling UK, thank you, FIRA, Sartre, FISP, and have I missed anybody? Yes. National Bed Federation, I am sorry, Jess, I am so sorry. Oh, I'll get shot, she'll shoot me later, I apologise. So I won't waffle on anymore, but I would like to introduce you to the master of the Furniture Makers Company, Tony Attard.
Right, thanks.
You just have to hold it very close to your mouth, or you can use that one.
I use that one.
That's fine, use that. And
Great.
So.
Okay, well, I think you can hear me anyway, can't you? I think, yeah. Yes? Yeah, great. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Furniture Makers Hall and our conference, Routes to Greater Sustainability. Today is, I think, a great example of how the Furniture Makers livery facilitates initiatives and can lead across all industry sectors. At the very start of my life in the textile industry, I was always conscious of the pollution created by bad practice, bad industrial practice. Maybe driven by cost, but maybe also just because that was the way it was always done. So when I started Panaz in 1987, I was able to make changes, and I introduced new and innovative ways of doing the same thing, but with less waste and less pollution. It wasn't trendy in those days. It was, in my mind, just good practice. And I'm pleased to say that many of those new radical ways of treating fabrics and producing beautiful designs became industry standards used by many of my competitors. But sustainability is not just a whim. It has to be a change of attitude. As a sailor, I've seen waste plastic bottles and cups that end up being washed in the oceans. You know, when you're, it's quite devastating when you're crossing the Atlantic and you're in the middle of the Atlantic and you see bottles floating in the Atlantic. It's quite something. But it wasn't long ago, I remind you, that plastic bottles didn't exist. Some people in the room may remember when all our beer and fizzy pop was delivered in bottles for which we paid a deposit of 1 penny, which we got back when the bottle was returned. And people then used to drink water from the tap. So I was pleased when I was asked 7 years ago to become chairman and one of the founding directors for a new company called Elucid that puts sustainability out and front of its business mantra, because we make wall tiles, floor tiles, and solid surfaces directly from waste streams. But I also, because of that experience, I understand from first-hand experience how hard it is to make consistent products from 100% recycled waste materials. Having said that, I will draw your attention to a young man who is exhibiting in one of the rooms at the front, the Arnold Moore room. His name is Christoph Kurtzman, and he studied at Ricot Wood, and he's making or repurposing or upcycling old bunk beds and making them into furniture. So that's also a really great and novel way of utilising materials from waste. So today's conference is aimed at a practical approach. There seems to be a lot of talk about sustainability, but with little practical advice. This conference today hopes to change that. Manufacturers, as we all know, are under increasing pressure from consumers, retailers, investors, and regulatory agencies to act on sustainability and to verify the sustainability of their products and practices. Of course, as a business, there are many environmental matters to consider and monitor as standard management practice, including energy management, greenhouse gas management, sustainable transportation, water resource management, biodiversity and ecological impacts, and of course waste management. And these are pretty much fundamental things of doing business, but they all generally come at a cost. However, sustainable working practices should also produce a large variety of advantages, such as reducing waste and therefore cost of material, energy and labour, reducing risk, and that can be reputational damage, creating innovation with better circular design, encouraging supply chain engagement, resilience, flexibility and reliability. And also, of course, sustainability can lead to increasing customer benefits like branding, enhanced branding, customer retention, brand recognition, creating transparency and ultimately customer retention. There's also enhanced impacts for stakeholders, of course, as well, which is better business practice, better business performance, shareholder expectation and value, better community and employee engagement. So there's also strong workforce benefits, which we're finding certainly at Panaz, and I know that Roly will be on later explaining to you what we're doing there. But it's making recruitment easier. We have lower staff turnover because of the engagement that we have with our staff, better work-life balance and well-being. And all these activities can be monitored using a sustainability roadmap. After setting business priorities, they can be monitored like other management metrics. So during today's conference, you will be introduced to many of these subjects, and you'll be able to learn how you can implement good practice into your business. Today, to be in business, it's not just a question of what you're doing, but why you are doing it. As they say, there is no planet B. So I'd like to thank, at this moment, Joanna for doing an incredible job of putting this conference together. And of course, for all the speakers who are giving up their time today to tell you the benefits of their knowledge. I hope you all have a really productive day. Thank you.
I'd like to hand over now to Jonathan Hindle, who's chairman of the British Furniture Confederation, and also Jessica Alexander, who is from the National Bed Federation, but also sits in the panel at the British Furniture Confederation too. Sorry, my brain froze there for a moment. So please, can I hand over to you?
I'll do that, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Master. was really encouraged to hear you already making the point that not all of these things need to be seen as costs, but also opportunities for savings and good practice across the whole gamut of corporate life. And you're going to hear a lot from Jessica Alexander, who sits on the BFC board, with the specific task of environmental and sustainable practices. You're going to hear a great deal more from her on what might be coming from government. So I'm just going to dwell, as I've been asked to, briefly, and since we've got about 20 minutes, I'll make it 5 for me, and just give you a bit of background on what the BFC are and how and why they fit into the picture and why it matters. So that's going backwards, all right? The BFC is really just an umbrella organisation. It's funded by its member trade associations or research and trade associations, all trade associations. The Commercial Interiors UK one there is perhaps better known to some of you as the BCFA, but that's their new logo and name. The BFM, FIRA, NBF, and the Furniture Makers Company has an interested part to play and makes a contribution to its costs. And its costs mostly are to meet the lobby. They're not meant to be called lobbyist groups anymore, but the advisory group that we retain to assist us in communicating with government, and also managing the secretariat for our all-party parliamentary group. A bit about that in a moment. So this is what the BFC's board is made up of, and I briefly mentioned that we assign specific vertical responsibilities to those who sit on that board, and Jessica, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, has the communications brief, but also the environmental brief. And you can see other people's assigned roles there. I think, Jeremy, you've just got trade written there. I don't know whether that covers it all for you, but that's pretty good. Anyway, I believe all of you are going to be here today and available to be asked questions of, and if you just make a mental note of their specialist subjects there, you'll be able to ask them the appropriate questions. And then I mentioned the All-Party Parliamentary Group, or All-Party Parliamentary Furniture Industry Group, another acronym for you. It's APPFIG. It's now led by Mark Eastwood, an MP in the, I'm trying to remember his, Dewsbury constituency. It's number 3, I think, in a ranking, which I'm about to show you, of regions that we're currently doing a study of, to show where most of our employed industry have their factories and their major clusters. So you can see there's also a good representation of crossbench. There's a couple of Labour MPs, I think, and some peers in the mix. So, oh yeah, there you go. There's the list of MPs that we are in regular contact with, who we've identified as having significant numbers of our industry in their constituencies. And obviously what we're looking to do is make them more active participants in the all-party parliamentary group, get on their feet in Parliament, ask the right kind of questions on our behalf. So the more engagement we can get from MPs in the all-party parliamentary group, the more influence we can exert in the House. I've had a sort of a long-standing battle to make sure that the industry is properly understood for its scale and its makeup. And it's a key ingredient in our getting heard and being able to influence government. And a recent study, which I've been helped on by Brian Ahern and the FARA team, of all of the SIC codes that make up the industry's stats, has actually had us revise our number for the industry value from 17.5 billion to 41.2 billion. And some might think, goodness me, how on earth has there been such a dramatic change? But I'll attempt just briefly to break it down, but then show you why it's suddenly taken a leap. It isn't actually, in reality, huge growth in the industry. It's just that we weren't reporting certain SIC codes that justifiably should be considered as part of the industry. So you can see there that we've written up 41.2 billion as the 2021 combined industry value, a 12.36 billion manufacturing value, which is about 30% up on the 2017 numbers that we last issued. So manufacturing makes up about 12.36 billion, retail about 18.44 billion, about, again, up 45%, or about 45% of the whole, and therefore the imports account for about 10.4 billion, so 25%. And the number of enterprises in 2020 was only so far recorded for manufacturers, but we'll have the bigger number soon, is about 6,503 manufacturers employing 97,000 people. Retailers about 9,813, and that includes lighting and other household articles, and wholesalers about 2,406. So, this is a big industry made up of a lot of SMEs. It rightly needs to be taken seriously by government, and this in turn means that we can take missions that are raised in sessions like this to government and get them heard and acted upon. And as they're all busy writing legislation at the moment that you're all going to hear a bit more about from Jessica, it's especially important we get a hearing. So that's really the most important reason for the BFC acting collectively on your behalf. And I'd now like to just pass you over to Jessica, who's going to spend a bit more time explaining what legislation's coming down the pipe. But I should just stress that this is about getting prepared. We know it's coming. I mean, there are dates like 2026 and 2028 for a lot of it becoming legislation, but it's still being written now. We have a chance to influence a lot of what is being written. So there are ESPRs, there are whatever they call them, the eco-design, sustainable products legislation that the EU's brought in, and America's got something similar. So we're bound to have something very soon, and you all need to know what that's going to mean for your businesses. So anyway, Jessica, if you'd like to join me briefly.
And see what I'm doing. Right, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Jonathan. First of all, I can tell you I'm not going to bore you with a long list of regulations this morning. What I am going to do is to try and put everyone's sustainability efforts and ambitions into the context of what's driving them. And I'm just going to highlight what I believe are going to be just a few of the key areas of how the way you do business now is going to have to change, and change fast in the future. And I've probably missed loads of things, although there's enough on here to keep us going for a while, I think. For many, those changes will only be driven by legislation. And one of the aims of all the trade associations here today, including the BFC, is to help our members be prepared for that. But there are other pressures also driving change. Well, firstly, our own consciences. One of the reasons we are all here is because we are all concerned about the future of us and our planet if we carry on consuming its resources unsustainably and pumping out harmful chemicals into the environment at the current rate. But perhaps some of you don't have bosses or boards who feel quite the same way. But I think we would all agree that there has been a real sea change here in leadership attitudes in the past couple of years. More to come, I'm sure, but it's a start. Well, consumers are, of course, a driver, especially for retailers. Research has shown that 92% of Gen Z consumers said they would rather do business with a company that supports environmental issues. However, we all know that the reality is if it's too difficult or more expensive than alternatives, doing the right thing doesn't always happen. Government legislation, when it comes, will have this in mind. Then there are the vociferous activists and the NGOs who can call out businesses they see as transgressors with potentially serious reputational damage. Such activism is, I believe, a vital part of keeping up the pressure for change. But they can be very unforgiving and unimpressed with efforts they see as not going far enough, which is a shame because it's starting to lead to what's been dubbed as green hushing, which means basically doing all the work but not saying anything publicly because of the risk of legal action. Another source of pressure for change is from financial institutions and investors, which are now requiring larger companies to report on their environmental, social, and governance activities in their annual reports. Research has shown that ESG issues are now a main consideration for nearly 2/3 of investors and asset managers. And just in case anybody doesn't know what ESG actually consists of, I'm not going to go into it now, but it's in my slide deck for future reference. Meanwhile, governments everywhere are moving towards more regulation regarding ESG reporting, and we can expect rapid adoption of standardised rules. Think double materiality here. That means looking not only at how your sustainable activities affect your bottom line, but also how your company's behaviours impacts the environment and society in general. The EU already has its Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive on the table, and the US is not far behind. And although it's kicking off with the larger companies, the EU directive says it will apply to SMEs optionally by 2026 and will be mandatory by 2028. That's not very far away, is it? So now we move on to regulations as pressure for change. And while there are some new ones already in force, we know plenty, and the new packaging EPR and plastics tax are some of the more recent ones we're all dealing with. Again, I've got a slide here on the packaging tax, which I won't go into now. But there are, of course, many which are yet to be developed or announced, and it's a case for us of anticipating and preparing for them. Let's start with greenhouse gas emissions and CO2. The UK government is one of many which has made net zero carbon emissions by 2050 a legally binding target, and which is going to be driving a lot of standards and legislation over the next few years. So far, over half the world's institutions and over 40% of businesses have already made net zero pledges, and there's loads of advice and tools, plus rewards and incentives out there to help achieve that goal. Many larger companies have already identified that over 90% of their carbon impacts are to be found in their indirect supply chain emissions, those pesky Scope 3 ones. This is producing a welcome cascade effect, which will surely accelerate the overall reduction in carbon emissions we also desperately need. But if it's a challenge for bigger businesses to achieve, it's a mountain for smaller ones. And our industry, as Jonathan has pointed out, has a lot of them. In the BFC's own environment survey only last year, only 44% said they were measuring their CO2 emissions, 38% didn't know what Scope 1, 2 or 3 emissions were, and 60% hadn't set any reduction targets yet. I'm hoping that these figures will have improved a bit somewhat since we did that survey a year or so ago. It's essential we keep every size and type of business in the loop, and we must work together to help each other as much as we can. And that's a vital role that the trade associations, such as those represented here, can do and facilitate. Here at the MBF, for instance, we've introduced our own bed industry-focused pledge for the planet, with 5 key goals and interim targets to be achieved at 2- and 5-year intervals. FISP, the Furniture Industry Sustainability Programme, supported by an independent audit, is another industry-specific initiative developed together by the key furniture trade associations, and you'll be hearing a bit more about FISP later on this morning. The government also recognises that achieving net zero requires a change in product policies and a move towards a more circular economy. How many of the 129 recommendations in the Independent Mission Zero Review by Chris Skidmore, which has just been published, get to be adopted remains to be seen. But we do know there are some significant legislative plans in the immediate pipeline which will directly affect us, namely flammability regulations and waste management. We can also see plenty of others that we don't know about yet, but we can be sure that they're going to impact on 3 key product areas: product design, chemical management, and data collection and labelling. First, product design. Key to a more circular business model is what you do at the start of the process, in other words, eco-design. And if you're not looking at this yet, you should be. The EU is on with its Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulations, ESPR, for all products sold within the single market. And our government is also likely to lay out its own similar requirements and set specific targets and minimum standards for such things as durability, repairability, recycled content, recyclability, and better information for consumers. Although I think they do understand these will need to vary from product to product. There will be plenty of consultation with industry on this, but it's no doubt that it will help to have already made a start. which is why the MBF has already published its eco-design principles for mattresses and developed our eco-design assessment toolkit, which you can find out more about upstairs. Eco-design is going to be an integral part of what is likely to be in the government's new waste prevention plan when it eventually gets published, because of its relevance to the circular economy, which is a key plank of all government sustainability thinking around the world. The draft plan proposes the introduction of many more extended producer responsibility schemes. They're attractive to government, not least because they transfer the cost of waste handling away from the public purse and towards the industry. But the plan also puts furniture, mattresses and carpets specifically on the list and proposed consultation on EPR by the end of 2025. However, recent news I've just learned suggests that deadline will not be met and is likely possibly to be absent for the plan in terms of those specific dates when it does get published, which again, I'm told will be soon. That's because just last week, when asked the question about EPR for textiles at an Environmental Audit Committee meeting, the Environment Secretary, Therese Coffey, ruled this and any other new EPR schemes out until the new packaging EPR has been bedded in. It's probably delay rather than ditch, so it's likely possibly to be one for the next government. Maybe that will be Labour. But when it does come, we don't know whether it'll be one scheme for all or whether they will allow a phased sector-by-sector approach. Back in 2021, at the consultation stage, the BFC warned of the dangers of a one-size-fits-all. I'm not going to read the response we gave, but it's there in my slides for later. It may be that mattresses will be the first. In Europe and in the US, there are mattress-only EPR schemes already in place. And in 2020, the MBF partnered Zero Waste Scotland on a project to explore the options for an EPR scheme for mattresses. The outcome was to recommend a UK-wide, industry-led, compulsory scheme, which was the outcome we were hoping for. Essentially because we think it's the only way to achieve a level playing field and near full compliance in our fragmented industry. Voluntarily, according to our data, the mattress industry is already recycling around 24% of waste mattresses, but the Bed Federation has a target of 75% diversion from landfill by 2028, and without legislation, I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that. Next on the list are chemicals, especially FR ones. There's a crossover here between different departments, between managing waste via DEFRA and what's likely to be in the new furniture flammability regulations being developed by the Office of Product Safety and Standards, which now sits within the new Department of Business and Trade, Aisha. And the direction of travel from both is using as few chemicals as possible and much more traceability. I think we can all see the sense in this because we're already witnessing the problems being caused by lack of information at the end of life in particular. Waste containing POPs must already be separated and incinerated at high temperatures, but it's DEFRA's recent research showing that the domestic seating in the waste stream contains an unacceptably high level of banned flame retardants that has led them to issue the new guidance about proper disposal of waste domestic seating, which we're all grappling with at the moment. And understandably, there's quite a debate going on about when a product actually gets defined as waste. Scotland, for instance, looks set to define it slightly differently and make life a little bit easier. But the point is, without labelling, it's very difficult. I've forgotten my waste become waste flight. The point is, without labelling, it's very hard to prove an item of domestic seating does not contain a POP. Without labelling or some other way of accessing the information in future, this problem could persist, especially if currently allowed chemicals are subsequently restricted and then banned. As we recently heard, melamine, a common FR used in foam, has been listed as a substance of very high concern under EU REACH. We wait to see if the new UK REACH regime will follow suit. In fact, it's not just chemical information labelling that's being discussed. The current debate is also on about product parcels, which will not only need to provide buyers with information about eco-design, chemical content and carbon footprints, but also information for reusers and recyclers processing products at the end of their first life and years down the line. We'll all be collecting, monitoring, measuring and recording far more of what goes into our products and on in our businesses than ever before. Will these products be standardised labels or just specify what information will be required? Will we access information via what would be very large paper or fabric labels, QR or RFID codes, or some other new technology, such as being woven directly into a fabric using photonic fibres, which can be customised to make them readable only under near-infrared light? Will this data be owned by the companies who generated them or stored in some kind of secure, centralised data storage which outlasts the life of both producers and sellers? Who knows? All this plus, of course, staying on the right side of the Green Claims Code from the Competition and Market Authority, which threatens to come down heavily on any company whose marketing is deemed to be overstating or incomplete in its claims and can't provide exact details behind every snappy slogan or logo. Let's hope there will be joined-up thinking here regarding future labelling and data requirements, because we'll certainly be pushing for it. And I'm sure that REACH regulations will also be altered at some point to ensure chemical producers have to release more information to their customers than they currently do. And I've just heard about yesterday a project that DEFRA has launched to look at options for a furniture product policy framework. Your guess is as good as mine as what that means, but I'll be finding out next week, I hope. We shall see. But my advice is to start getting into the habit of collecting and recording as much information as possible, as soon as possible. So as promised, I haven't given you a long list of regulations today, but I hope you've given you a flavour of the areas for action, so you are beginning to prepare. In summary, there's a lot of pressure, currently mostly voluntary, but a lot more compulsory stuff is likely over the next few years. And the key areas to be focusing on and get ahead with are carbon measurement and reduction, eco-design, chemical reduction and traceability, recycling where possible, and data collection and recording. I'm sure there's some others as well that I haven't mentioned, but those are very relevant to our industry. I think I've probably already indicated it's a minefield out there. I had to add things 3 times to my presentation in the last week because of new information that came out of government or elsewhere. But by working together, businesses, trade associations and government, I'm optimistic we can play an active part in shaping all these changes, that we'll get there, that we'll embrace the change and the opportunities that exist. And together we can transform our economy into a green and pleasant one with a healthy future. Thank you very much.